So I'm outside Barnes & Noble. I just picked up my copy of Sunrise on the Reaping. I'm waiting for the release party to start. And at the BN Cafe, I didn't know it was a Starbucks, but they had signature drinks for the release party. And this one is the Blackberry Sage Refresher, which is like, tastes like Star-Crossed Lovers. I'm sorry it's noisy, like I'm right next to the street, but I can't film inside the bookstore either because they're playing music, so it's gonna be copyrighted. But yeah, so this one is like blackberry and sage sparkling water, and I don't know, I like it. I think I might be able to recreate it at home. And I'm trying to read the book before I get inside. Of course, I'm not gonna be able to finish it, but at least like read some, just in case anybody who attended the release party is gonna spoil it during the party. So at least I read a good chunk of it. I'm trying to be better at vlogging in public, but it's still very awkward. So every time somebody passes by, I stop recording. As far as predictions for this book, I don't have much prediction. My only wish is we get to see Candace's parents and Peter's parents as kind of like secondary characters in this book, because that's the only reason I would want to read a Haymitch story, since we get a lot of his story in Catching Fire already. Although the plug for this book is like, if you think you know Haymitch games, you don't know it. So either way, I'm excited to read it just based on these codes. It's 5 o'clock, but they haven't started yet. But look at this book, it's so pretty. You got Lily of Valleys. I don't know if it's any good though.
So now I'm convinced that I can read anything in the young adult section.
That would be a very interesting story.
I haven't read that series, but I heard it's good.
It's actually pretty cool. We have some. I think we had like the paperback before to get started. I like, honestly, my favorite part is like, so she made her like that little everyone got their name in? Okay. Perfect. All right, let me explain how the reaping will work.
Okay, I just got back from the release party at Barnes & Noble for Sunrise and the Reaping. I did vlog some of it. I don't know how well I did though, but just to recap what happened, my release party happened at March 18th, not 17th. I know a lot of Barnes & Noble did midnight releases, but some of them actually did the day off, and which worked out better for me because this one starts at 5 p.m. as opposed to the release party. It starts like 10 p.m. up until midnight, and I can't do that. So I went there a little bit earlier. I got there around 4 to pick up my copy, and then at 5 the party was supposed to start, but it actually didn't start until 6 because it was advertised on the website it was start at 7, but when I called they said we're going to start at 5, and in their socials they said 5 p.m. We waited for people to come in, but it wasn't really that bad of a wait. There were activities. We made friendship bracelets. There's like crosswords, there's like trivia games that, you know, keep us occupied, and we'll also of course talk about the books. And as you might see, I have this Sunrise on the Reaping hat. So at the release party there were like games like a scavenger hunt, a trivia game, and a reaping. So the scavenger hat, this was the prize. This is what I wanted the most because this can't be bought anywhere. Like I asked them, so if I don't win this, do you think I can buy it somewhere? And they said no, because this was sent by the publisher. It's not for sale by Barnes & Noble, and they don't think it's going to be on sale for anywhere else. And the other prizes were like Mockingjay pens and the illustrated version of the first Hunger Games book, which are all great, but this is the one that I really want. I already had the Mockingjay pen and the illustrated version. I don't have it yet, but I could purchase it. This one, I didn't. First of all, I was the only millennial there. I was also the only one that's kind of dressed up for the event. Like I have my Mockingjay necklace, my Hot Topic cardigan from the Battle of Songbirds and Snakes, my District 12 victory shirt. So I'm the only one that's dressed up. I'm the only one that's a millennial, and everyone else that got there were like not even Gen Z. They were Gen Alpha. They were like 13, 14-year-old. I was kind of like, oh my god. But luckily the Barnes & Noble staff, they were really nice. They were fellow millennials, so we're kind of discussing the difference between the Hunger Games fandom when it was just millennials and now for the new generation. Because the new generation, they got the books right away. In my opinion, they're Team Peter right away. But with the millennials, there was like Team Gail versus Team Peter. Like, how could that even happen? It's like Team Peter right away. So we have to produce like 3 books that the cover has a crown, a bird, and a snake. And I was smart. I picked the closest aisle that would likely have all those books, and I was able to get all 3 books right away, and I got the hat. So I'm really happy about this one. And for the trivia game, I also won it. Well, I tied 1 person, so I had good chances of winning the illustrated book. But I was like, I already got the hat, and this is one of the bigger prizes. So I said the person that I tied with can have the illustrated book. But we still did a game, and the game was like naming victors, like see who could name the most. And honestly, I blanked out in a lot of them, so even if we played for it, she would still gotten the book. So, but I'm really happy that I got the hat. And since I arrived a little bit early, I started reading the book, and I only got up to 12 pages. But even with just the first 12 pages, there was already so much information that I already got from Sunrise in the Reaping. And if you haven't read the book yet, this is going to be not spoiler free from this point onward. So I'm going to be mentioning spoilers, so if you want to click out, save this and watch this later so you could like discuss the book with me, then leave now and then come back after you finish the book. So I'm going to give you time to leave in 3, 2, 1. I went to this book pretty spoiler free. I read like a couple of excerpts that was released, but that's it. But even that don't really give much away once you start reading the book, because there are like gaps within the excerpts that was given. And before the book started, there was like 4 quotes by George Orwell, William Blake, and David Hume. And this is basically essentially the central themes of the books, which I'm glad she included this. And almost immediately, like the David Hume quote from the very last one, it was already quoted by Hamish within like the first 12 pages. And for me, going into this book, I wasn't really one of those people enthused for Hamish books, because I feel like in Catching Fire we already get a good chunk of his story. So I wasn't really enthused for a Hamish book, unlike other people. But if we're gonna get a Hamish book, what I really want is to learn more about District 12 characters, especially during Katniss's parents and Peeta's time, because they were friends with Hamish indirectly or directly. We kind of knew that already from Catching Fire. At least Hamish was acquainted with Katniss's mom, and Katniss's mom is best friends with Miss Celia Donner, who we know went to the games with Hamish. But during the promo of this book, the editor said, whatever we know about Hamish's games, we know nothing at all. So I'm excited for that part. And this is a big spoiler. If you decided to stay and you haven't read the book, last chance to click out, because this is a big spoiler. Lenore Dove, Hamish's girlfriend, which you already know during the promos, is related to the Covey. And get this, Lenore Dove is raised by gunkles. Like, he was raised by 2 of her uncles. I don't know how they are related. I think they're a gay couple. So Lenore Dove, Hamish's girlfriend, was raised by gunkles. Lenore Dove is part of the Covey, and she sings like the rebellious song, but she sings it in private, because unlike Lucy Baird, she is an introvert, and one of her uncles is related directly to Lucy Baird. And then we also get to meet Katniss's dad right away, and we get his name finally, Burdock Everdeen. That is his name, Burdock Everdeen, and Burdock is cousins with Lenore Dove. So Katniss's dad is also indirectly or distantly related to Lucy Gray Bird. Compared to the previous books, I feel like Suzanne Collins has been paying more attention to what the fans are asking, or the questions they have regarding with the Hunger Games universe, because like I said, just within the 12 pages of this book, we are fed. I suppose in the trilogy, there were so many questions left unanswered. There were so many things that we didn't know, like we didn't know the name of Katniss's parents, Peeta's parents, the name of their kids, and there was a lot of gaps in the story that might not be essential to the plot, but essential to how we know the characters. So I feel like in this book we're gonna get a lot of that, and I'm really hoping, because one of my biggest wish lists for the Hamish book, if we're ever gonna get one, like I said, is to learn more about Katniss's parents and Peeta's parents and the relationships and how Hamish's games affected them and in their relationships. Because as far as we know, Katniss's mom was dating Peeta's mom, but right after the games happened, they broke up or something happened. Peeta's dad was supposed to marry Katniss's mom. It never happened. After the games, Maycelia's death really affected Katniss's mom, and then somewhere down the road, she got acquainted with Burdock Everdeen, Mr. Everdeen, Katniss' dad, and that's how they ended up together and defied the societal norms of merchant and seam. So I'm really excited to discover all of that in this book as I read it. And tonight I'm just gonna try to read as much as I can. I'm not trying to finish this overnight because I really want to savor it. So I'm gonna go ahead, read some more, and maybe give you reactions as I read through the first few chapters that I read tonight before I go to bed. It's not really that long compared to Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a lot longer. This one is kind of like the same length of the first trilogy books. So yeah, see you after I read a book or after I've gone through chapters and I want to react and review them for you chapter by chapter. I am taking notes as I read this, like new characters and then kind of like significant events or new information that we learned from this book. And I said I was going to do a chapter by chapter review, but I just had to stop when I got this information from the book. So the logo in the book is actually a flint striker. It's a gift from Lenore Dove, which her uncle made, one of her gunkles. And this is used to start a fire, create a spark, if you will. So you can see what Suzanne is putting on. It's like Haymitch spark, and then he will eventually mentor the girl on fire. Smart Suzanne, smart Suzanne. And honestly, she has given us so much information already, and I'm only in page 12. And the flint striker had the snake and the bird, and Haymitch was like, oh, I don't want to ruin it. And then Lenore said, don't worry, you won't ruin it. It takes a lot to break this too. They're survivors. And now, at this point in the book, I take the snake to be Snow, like from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snake, and the bird to be Katniss. And I guess this is going to be Haymitch, the link between two of them. Theory. We know Katniss's mom. We know Katniss's mom. Haymitch goes to the apothecary. He saw chamomiles that he knows bordocks is gathered in the woods. And then there is his classmate, long blonde hair, named Astrid March. Mrs. Everdeen is Astrid March. Her married name is March, and I want to believe Suzanne Collins gave her the last name March after the March sisters in Little Women, after Jo March. And Haymitch's impression of her was like, he doesn't like her. She's the town beauty and rich, you know, in District 12 standards. But one time, Astrid went to the scene to heal somebody, and that changed Haymitch's opinion of her. We got Katniss's parents, Burdock Everdeen and Astrid March. Katniss's full name is Katniss March Everdeen. I can't. Like, Suzanne Collins is feeding us. So far, everything that I want to know from the book, well, a good part of it is already coming through by meeting Katniss's, and by meeting Katniss's parents. I hope we get to meet Peeta's parents too. And I hope it's not just a casual mention of Astrid and Burdock, that we're definitely gonna see more of them in the rest of the book. I am really hoping, I am hoping so bad that we see the development of their relationship in this book. Oh my god. I reached the end of chapter 1, and kind of like with the first Hunger Games book, it ends at the calling of the names at the reaping. But luck would have it, Haymitch's name wasn't called. It was somebody else's. It was Wood by chance, and according to Haymitch, the Chances are more of a rebel than the Abernathys. So when Woodbine got called, he tried to run off along with his brothers, I guess, and the peacekeepers shot him. So I guess in the second chapter we'll find out how Haymitch got Reap instead. So I think this is where like the editor comment comes in, like what we know about the games, and that we don't really know what happens in Haymitch's games, because in the tape that Katniss and Peeta watch, Haymitch got Reap like in a regular ceremony. So I guess these are kind of like behind the scenes of the reaping of the second quarter quell that wasn't shown and that wasn't put on record. So it's gonna be really interesting. And we also got the names of the 2 other tributes that's going to be, you know, that will make up the 4. Of course, we know Maisily is Reap, and Hamish describes her as like this haughty girl that, you know, kind of like with her twin sister, popular and all of that. And he didn't think that she was going to get Reap because the Donners are already set to kind of take over the next mayor, the Mayor Alistair, which the mayor is a female, and she also kind of like a bit of a rebel, or at least doesn't approve of the reaping. So Hamish thinks that Mayor Alistair is also going to be like replaced real soon. And I'm also kind of surprised that townfolk could actually rise to the status of mayors, and all the mayors are kind of like from the capital. So maybe the Donners also have lineage or have relations to the capital. We don't know. As far as we know, they own the sweet shop in District 12 as merchants, and I'm so happy we met Katniss's parents and we actually see them as characters. They weren't just mentioned like I initially thought. And we got their names, Burdock Everdeen and Asteroid March. Hopefully we'll see more of them as the book goes on, but now Hamish is heading to the game, so we probably wouldn't. I'm hoping, kind of like with the Battle of Sombers and Snakes, that after he wins his games, we go back to 12, see how this unfolds. We haven't seen Peeta's parents or any mention of it. I thought Blair was gonna be his dad, but it's not. And the thing is, I was under an impression, the fandom was under an impression for the longest time that Katniss's mom was dating Peeta's dad when Hamish went to the games. And it was after the games where Astrid and Burdock got together, and, you know, Astrid broke up with Peeta's dad because of how the games turned out. But that is not the case. It seems like Katniss's mom, Astrid, and Burdock, Katniss's future dad, already has something going on, like at least a flirtation, nothing official. They're not even dating or courting. They just like, it's kind of well-known fact that they like each other, but they're nothing official because they're a seaman merchant. So I am kind of curious to see how the relationship unfolds in this book. I really hope we get to meet at least Peeta's dad, because it was part of the equation in Catching Fire, or in the entire trilogy, because we famously know that Peeta's dad said to Peeta that he was going to marry Katniss's mom. And now I'm wondering if Peeta's dad was just Delulu. They weren't dating at all, because that was our assumption. But I think now, with the way his story is unfolding, and mind you, I'm only just in chapter 1, that maybe Peeta's dad was just Delulu and he wasn't dating Katniss's mom. And they were just like, he just like admired Katniss's mom from afar, because according to Hamish, Katniss's mom is popular. She's a popular girl in District 12, at least in their school. But just with the first chapter, we've met so many characters already, but it doesn't feel like an info dump. It feels like each new revelation is an exciting information to find out, and meeting all these characters is kind of like, what I love about Susan Collins is she doesn't mention anyone that is irrelevant. So I feel like all these characters, even though we met like so many new ones, they're all gonna be like important in this story one way or the other. And as far as new information that we got from this first chapter alone, we know that during this time the Hob already exists, which is kind of like the black market in the capital, in District 12. But we also know something new, that there is such thing as a capital store, which is kind of like the official version of the Hob, and where miners and district people could spend their scrip, which is what miners get paid with. But they also have cash. Aside from script, they also have cash. So there's kind of like 2 currencies that goes on in District 12, or at least in Pan Am. And the hovercraft also exists. Hamish was kind of worried about that while they were in the meadow. We know Hamish's dad died in the coal mine blast. He already has a lot of parallels with Katniss, like, you know, only survived by his mom. His mom is a washerwoman, which is similar to Hazel Hawthorne, Gail's mom. And Hamish having a 10-year-old daughter, Sid, he also had to take out Tesserae. So by the time the second quarter quell comes, he also has 20 Tesserae in the pool, just like Katniss. We also get to know a lot more about Lenore Dove. She is Covey, she is a beard. I think her mom's side is a beard, which is, you know, Lucy Gray's bird's family line, and we also know she plays the piano. She plays the piano for the mayor, who allows her to practice on their piano in exchange for her performances. And the Covey at this point are no longer singers, they're just musicians. They don't play their songs because their songs are considered rebellious. And one interesting thing that I find about Lenore Dove is that her eyes is green. And as we know, in District 12, the Seam folk have gray eyes, the Merchant have blue eyes, but she has green eyes. And we do know that Covey are not originally from District 12, and we know Lucy Gray is not from District 12 originally. So it is interesting that the Baird line or the Covey line has green eyes. Again, at least at this point, even though the Coveys at the very least have been in District 12 for 25 years, they're still kind of like outsiders to the entire world of District 12. And it's confirmed at least one of Lenore Dove's guardian uncle is gay, and that he had a lover in District 12, which Hamish approves of, but it doesn't seem like the relationship is still going on. So I wonder if he is actually in a relationship with Tam Amber, the other uncle that raised Lenore Dove, or are they related with each other? We don't know, because like with Burdock and Lenore Dove, Burdock calls Lenore Dove cousin, but they're not really cousins. This is kind of like what Katniss said about Seam folk. Everyone could be traced as cousins at some point if you just dig hard enough. That's why her and Gale could be passed off as cousins in Catching Fire, because not only they look alike, but it's also kind of true that if they do trace their lineage far enough, they probably are related. I think one line that is going to be very popular is from this chapter, which is "I love you like all fire." So that's kind of like the new "you love me real or not real," or kind of like, you know, if you're a Marvel fan, "I love you 3000." So it is kind of like that. So I think it's going to be heavily coded, like "I love you like an all fire." Okay, finish chapter 2. So it's mainly how Hamish got reaped. So Hamish is technically a volunteer, but he was involuntarily volunteered. Essentially, Drusilla, the District 12 escort, and Plutarch Heavensby, who we meet in the second chapter, volunteers him in place of the one that got killed. So it's an interesting parallel to Katniss volunteering. Hamish is also a volunteer, but like the propaganda starts to enter here, where all of that we don't really see what the Capitol sees, and what is recorded and what Peeta and Katniss saw is basically Hamish just being reaped like regular, when it was anything but. And there's also kind of like the theme of the book, or at least the quote that's heavily promoted in the book enter here, that they're not going to use their tears for entertainment. So Plutarch, who is I guess the cameraman for the Hunger Games, and he got assigned to District 12, is he wants to get footage of the loved ones kind of like, you know, crying and all of that when their loved one got reaped. Lenore Dove won't give it to him, so he tried bargaining with the other tributes, like with Luella. His family didn't really comply, and then he tried it with Hamish's mom and brother, and Hamish didn't want him to, but like his mom was like, "I'll do it as long as you give me a couple minutes with him," and Plutarch agreed. But then they kind of like overdid it, and so Hamish was like, "Stop, no more." But Plutarch still ended up giving them a couple minutes together. Lenore was able to say goodbye in the end, but in a way that Plutarch wasn't able to capture it. It's like when the train was already leaving, and it says this: "She denied Plutarch the chance to broadcast her farewell. The moment our hearts shattered, it belongs to us." Susan Collins is so good with words, and I hate the escort Drusilla. I hate her so much. And the thing is though, I'm a Hafey shipper. Maybe not from the books, because I didn't see any romantic relationship between Hamish and Effie in the books, but definitely the versions in the movies. So I think Hamish's experience with Drusilla, I don't think Hamish, at least book Hamish, was gonna fall in love with Effie, at least the way we thought they were in the movies. I think he would have probably had a cordial relationship with Effie, but I think his experience with Drusilla has tainted his view of escorts, and I don't think they're gonna fall in love canonically. I just don't think it is. As much as I am a Hafey shipper, this is really kind of like, ain't gonna happen. I don't think so. It never will. And another thing that we got to meet in chapter 2, Peeta's dad. His name is Arthur Millard. We meet him very briefly at the reaping. he basically got shocked when the other tribute, the original tribute that got called, what is his name, Woodwine or something, got shot. The blood was splattered on him. He couldn't react, and it was Katniss's dad, Burdock, who knocked him on the knee so that he would get down. And because he was splattered with blood, he was taken away so that during the reshoot he's not seen anywhere. So that is kind of like a first glimpse of Peeta's dad, Otto Millark. We know he's the Baker son's boy, so it's pretty easy to assume that he is going to be Peeta's dad. So far, no interactions yet with Astrid, Katniss's mom, so at this point I'm still thinking he is Delulu for thinking that he would marry Katniss's mom. And it kind of makes sense that we know now where Peeta got his Delulu-ness also when it comes to Katniss. So yeah, like father, like son. Okay. So on chapter 3, we'll learn that by the second quarterquell, everything is pretty much similar to how Katniss's and Peeta's games go on the 74th Hunger Games. Like after they reap, they get to say goodbye to their loved ones, although a little bit different here with the way it went for Haymitch. And also on the train, they get fed really well. Unlike with Lucy Gray's games, they didn't get fed at all. And they're fed really well, and maybe not as well as Katniss and Peeta, but they were served good food and they were treated as guests. And also they get to have mentors, and for other districts, the mentors are the district's previous victors. But since District 12 doesn't have one, at least that they know of, they get assigned victors from other districts, which Haymitch says is basically meaningless because what victor would want to help the tributes from other districts and let the tributes from their own district die? So I think he thinks that's pointless, and he hasn't really remembered any previous mentors from District 12. And Lucy Gray is kind of mentioned a little bit. They say like they don't really know who the first victor is. There's some shoddy footage. Even his mom don't know Lucy Gray because she wasn't born yet during her games. And Lenore Dolph, who has a direct relation to Lucy Gray, she doesn't like talking about her. So whenever she's brought up, Lenore Dolph doesn't want to discuss her. And I don't think Haymitch even knows that they are related, just that Lenore doesn't want to discuss her. Like, I don't think Haymitch even knows that Lucy Gray is a covey. And based on Catching Fire, we kind of like assume Haymitch was a loner, that he separated himself from everyone in the games. But in the train, he actually allies immediately with Luella, the 13-year-old who he considered his buddy and has like an inside joke going on. And he even calls her sweetheart, which is what Haymitch calls Katniss in the books. And also Macy Donner, she is starting to become my favorite. I love her. She's so funny. She reminds me of fanfic Pansy Parkinson or Santana from Glee, or even like Zoe Dutch character in Zombieland. That kind of like popular girl who's kind of mean, but when you really dissect her words, she really means well and she's trying to help. So I think I'm going to be a huge fan of Macy Donner in these books, and I can't wait to hear more from her because we know eventually that Macy and Haymitch do ally up in the games later on. And oh, we also see more of Plutarch in here, and we kind of see what his role is, even though it's not clearly defined. He's there to get footage of the District 12 tributes, and in here of course he manipulates the footage that he gets to make the District 12 look even better on screen as opposed to what really happened. So in hopes that it would attract them sponsors, or at least not get written off quite easily. There's a paragraph at the end of the chapter that kind of like summarizes Haymitch's impression of Plutarch. I'm entirely the capitalist plaything. They will use me for entertainment and kill me. The truth will have no say in it. Plutarch acts friendly, but his indulgences, my family's goodbyes, his fancy sandwiches are just a method to manage me. Because happy playthings are easier to handle than raging ones. To get his footage, he indulged me right into the arena. So Haymitch really is aware of Plutarch having these games. And of course, naturally, the relationship progresses and changes from the second quarterquell to the third quarterquell, and even maybe just throughout this book. But it's interesting to me knowing how Plutarch operates. He allowed Katniss to also fall victim to Plutarch, because again, Katniss was manipulated by a lot of people in the original trilogy, as we know, especially by Plutarch. Even though Plutarch's goal is to take down Snow and the capital regime, he operates on the notion of the ends justify the means. but it is at Katniss's expense. It is Katniss making the sacrifice, not Plutarch. So knowing that is how Plutarch operates, I wonder how Haymitch justified it in his head to let Plutarch use Katniss the way Plutarch has used him in the second quarter Cal. So that will be interesting to see as we read in this book and how it unfolds, because I think it's a very good ethical question that is raised for Haymitch's character, that knowing how Plutarch operates, he still let Plutarch use Katniss. And of course, we know Katniss is the symbol of the rebellion. Maybe Haymitch saw the bigger picture. Yes, Katniss gets sacrificed, but a lot less people are going to get sacrificed in the future if Katniss becomes the Mockingjay. Hopefully we'll kind of discover in this book how Haymitch does rationalize it in his head, or it's just like one more thing, one more burden that he chooses to carry for the sake of saving the rest of Panem or saving the future children of Panem. So chapter 4 and 5, the tributes arrived at the tribute center where they do meet their prep team. They do get a prep team. They get kind of like, you know, shaved, showered, and cleaned by them. And then they have a stylist named Magno who is really useless. It's nothing like Cinna. Didn't even appear until the last minutes. Only gave them like their old uniforms, the coal miners that everyone hates, but they got no choice. They wore it to go to the parade. And what stood out to me in this chapter is like in chapter 4, Haymitch is once again reminded by the words of his father and mother, don't let them use you, which echoes Peeta's not wanting to be a piece in the game. So I think Haymitch is already like starting to espouse that. And then May Seeley has welts from her scrabble with Drusilla the escort, and Haymitch comments that it actually made her look badass. So I think that's the inspiration of Haymitch for Peeta later on, when he got like bruises from like, you know, fighting with him, and he said, no, let it show, let the sponsor see it, it's gonna work in her favor. The same way May Seeley's welts and scars works in her favor in the tribute center. And again, I'm loving May Seeley so much. Her comebacks are so hilarious and so funny. I really like her. And then there's Wyatt, the other District 12 tribute. He is an odd maker. Basically, he's part of the pool in District 12 that started to take bets on tributes, and Luella didn't want her and Haymitch to team up with him because he has bad news. But then Wyatt kind of like made a comment on like sizing up one of the tributes, the District 1 tribute, and his odds. So Wyatt kind of like makes a case for himself that he knows how to size up the competition. So even if they don't want to ally with him, they kind of need him for that skill. But Luella and Haymitch still kind of like don't want to, and Maiseela's like, well, who says we want to ally with you anyways? And with Wyatt's character, I feel like he is a representation of MAGA almost. Enables the bad things, thinking it's not going to happen to him. He engaged into this betting pool for other tributes, thinking it's not going to get reaped, only for him to get reaped in the end. And now he's counting on other people who are against the betting, who are against the Hunger Games, to ally with him to help him also save his own skin. So I thought that was very interesting. MAGA parallel. Again, more similarities to Candace's games. Tokens are allowed. Didn't really say for how long they've been allowed, but by the time the second quarter call comes, it is already allowed. And Haymitch tries to get his flint striker to be allowed and just pretend it's just another necklace that is not going to be like a weapon for the arena. And Haymitch brings up that May Seeley loves jewelry and that it was Lenore's doll's uncle, Tam Amber, who created the Mockingjay pen. But the kind of sad thing about it is May Seeley actually hates the Mockingjay pen. She doesn't like it. She just like shoves it in her drawer. And Lenore Dove actually wanted to steal it back, but then they were like, it's not worth it. But it's good that Madge Undersea kind of like treasures the Mockingjay pen. And I thought it was going to be May Seeley's token in the arena because she had 6 necklaces on her, but it didn't say which necklaces, so I thought the Mockingjay pin is one of them. So I guess it kind of like makes sense in the movie. It wasn't really referred to that the Mockingjay pin is hers because she didn't really appreciate it. Or I guess maybe this is in Collins retconning, or maybe explaining for the sake of the movie adaptation why the link is not clearly there, or kind of explains why the Mockingjay pin was just found at the Hob. In the movie at least, that because it's something that May Seeley didn't really treasure, but it has a connection to her. That Luella dies during the parade even before she gets to the games. So and there goes Hamish's ally. Okay, I don't know what time it is, but I finished reading chapter 69, which concludes part 1 of the book, and it ends on a crazy cliffhanger, so I can't wait to finish it tomorrow. But here are my thoughts on chapter 69. First, I would say that I forgot to mention on chapter 5, I thought that I had that Leonard Dove reminds me of Gail Hawthorne on 2 things. One, I think Leonard Dove's rebellion is very similar to Gail's. It's like more stick it to the capital, consequences be damned. And also the way her presence is in the book is very similar to Gail's presence in the first Hunger Games book. Like, he is not there a lot, but Katniss mentions him a lot, and kind of like moments they shared, conversations they had. And it's the same here. So even though Leonard Dove is not physically in the capital with Hamish, he mentions her a lot, the conversations they have, the moments they shared, and how it relates to the current moment Hamish is in. And at this point, Luella has died in the chariot parade, and Hamish kind of did a rebellious thing at encouragement of Mace Seeley to run away with Luella's body. And he knows that he can't really outrun the peacekeepers and he doesn't really know where to go. But even then, just that simple act of rebellion is testing the capital's limits. And he presented the body of Luella in front of Snow at by his balcony, and then kind of like clap, and it was like, oh, spin that, Plutarch, how are you gonna not show that to the capital or to the viewers of the games? But of course it just simply got cut off eventually. That's the first time we see President Snow, and actually I feel like Hamish is a lot more rebellious than Katniss ever was during her games, whether it's the 74th or 75th. And I can see why Snow eventually punishes Hamish the way that he does. And also Hamish, even though he's just a tribute right now, you can see the mentor in him, because he kind of like guides the other tributes, whether it is Wyatt and Mace Seeley and even Ampert, who we discover is Beety's son, and as a punishment for Beety's act of like rebellion, for like tampering with the capital's communications or something, they made him mentor his son for these games. And I don't know if it was actually already revealed in previous books or even in the movies, but Beetee played the 34th Hunger Games, Varys played the 49th Hunger Games. And it also shows that these victors that we meet in Catching Fire and in Mockingjay were rebels in their own games in their own way. Like with Varys, she wants the game by like tricking the arena or using the arena in her favor. BT is kind of like the same way, and we know Hamish will later on will use the arena as a weapon. So I feel like every single person or every single victor that was involved in the rebellion with Plutarch has been a rebel in one form or another for their games. It is revealed in chapter 6 that Varys and Mags are the mentors for District 12, and an interesting thing that they did in chapter 7 is actually ask the tributes what they want out of their games. Because in previous years, Mags admitted that I just assumed that they want to live, they want to win the games, but actually that might not be what they want from these games. Wyatt, Mace Seeley, and Hamish kind of like tell them what they want out of the games. So basically they want to die quick, they don't want their deaths to be sensationalized or be used for entertainment, or basically not be so brutal that it would be the lasting memory of their loved ones back home, especially for Hamish. But also Hamish also kind of expressed that he wants to end the Hunger Games. I don't think he said it to be rebellious or to become a rebel, but he just said it to be like, I think 50 years of paying for what they think our fault was is enough. And chapter 8 is just more of the training session, like learning skills, forming alliances, and Ampert kind of have this idea of like all the non-careers becoming allies together to beat the careers at their games, and they call themselves the newcomers as like, you know, a counterpart to the careers. And I'm kind of like, you might as well call yourself interns. But it's not a great name, but it's the name that they went with. And there's like the potato experiment. So BT is teaching Hamish to create electricity from potato, which all of us are familiar with as like a high school or middle school experiment that a lot of us have done, or at least seen done or familiar with. And I feel like potato, again, is a running theme in this series. Suzanne loves potato. Katniss is of course named after a potato, a dog potato. So I don't know, maybe this potato is going to be a significant thing in the games and part of is going to be part of Snow's downfall, or at least Haymitch's victory in these games. And chapter 9 is very interesting. Kind of like the key event here is Snow wants to see Haymitch, and Plutarch brought him to his house to meet with President Snow. But before that, they have a discussion about like alcohol, about Nepenthe as a type of alcohol. And as a plant girly, I don't know why it slipped my mind that Nepenthe is also a type of a plant. It's a type of a plant that is carnivorous. It's kind of like a Venus plant, so that one that kind of like eats something like bugs or something. So I don't know why I didn't make that connection right away, but they did have an interesting analogy or comparison between Nepenthes, the alcohol, and Nepenthes, the plants. Either way, it's killing somebody by drowning them. Alcohol is frequently mentioned in this book so far, which is kind of like foreshadowing Haymitch alcoholism, which is funny because he mentioned earlier in this book is he doesn't even drink. I mean, he is 16, but he doesn't really drink or have any inclinations to drink, but he understands that people use alcohol to forget. People in District 12 use it, and even people in the capital use it. So I think eventually alcohol is the mechanism or the thing that he turns to just forget all his sorrows and all his pain and everything that has happened to him in the games and afterwards. And then at this point, we finally spend some time with President Snow when President Snow and Haymitch meets. And at this point, President Snow is 58 years old and he is actually frail. He is sick. And when Haymitch meets him up close, he was like vomiting blood and everything. And Plutarch even said, "Oh, you need to see a doctor, Mr. President." But Snow was like, the parade master fared worse. So essentially what we know from Snow, this indicates how Snow used poison as a weapon against his enemies, but at the same time he takes them to not be obvious, or build his immunity to it or something, so he ingests the poison too, using the tactic of also ingesting the poison himself, maybe at not the same quantity to kill him of course, but enough to make him sick. So which is what we see here. And there was like a scene where like, oh, he needs milk. Plutarch asked Haymitch to get it, but then Haymitch found it, but he took time to find it, and when he found it, he drank it and said, "Oh, there's no milk," which is crazy. And Haymitch and Snow finally talk, and this is where it's like kind of gets very interesting. Is Snow reminisces about 12, and Haymitch is just baffled how Snow knows so much about 12, about its culture, about the hub, about everything really. And then Haymitch realizes that he knows Leonard Dove, and he knows that Leonard Dove is a covey. And he doesn't know why he knows that, but we know why. And it's not surprising that Snow has kept tabs on the covey. And it's also interesting how he talks about Leonard Dove, like, oh, you think she loves you, but she doesn't really, and she doesn't include you in her plans for the future. So maybe she doesn't really love you at all. And you know, he's talking about Lucy Greybeard and him. Even after all these years, Snow hasn't gotten over his situationship with Lucy Grey, and he's still whining and complaining about it and projecting with Haymitch and Leonard Dove, and eventually with Katniss and Peeta, that no, she doesn't really love you, and being in the games is actually blessing these guys because, you know, this girl is just gonna break your heart or whatever. So it's really funny. Also, this meeting kind of parallels the meeting between Katniss and Snow in Catching Fire, at the beginning of Catching Fire. So basically, Snow tells Haymitch, either you toe the line or I'm gonna make your worst dreams come true, is to make sure that you die the most brutal death in the arena for your mother and for your brother to watch, and for Leonard Dove to watch. So you pick. And then at the very end of it, he brings someone out, and it's Luella McCoy, and Luella is alive, which I don't know if she's actually alive or if that is actually Luella. We'll, I guess, find out in the second part. But of course she could be revived, even though Haymitch probably thought he's dead, because we know the medicine in the capital is pretty advanced. They brought people back essentially from the dead. They did it with Peeta after the first games, so it's no surprise that they were able to save Luella as well. So that's very interesting. And so that's very interesting. So I don't know why President Snow would want to save Luella, only maybe to put her back in the games, or maybe Luella is a plant. I don't know. we will see. We'll find out in part 2 and in part 3. So far this first book is tracking a lot more like the first Hunger Games book with its pacing and where we're at in the story. So part 2 is a lot likely being in the arena, but I hope by the time we get to part 3 we actually go back to District 12 like we did in the Battle of Songbirds and Snakes and kind of see like the aftermath of the games, because we do know several things will happen. And of course I want to go back to his friends, Katniss's mom, Katniss's father, and Peeta's dad, and just see how the relationships develops there after the games, after Mayceli's death and all of that. And so far my favorite character, aside from Hamish of course, is Mayceli Donner. She is funny. She is like the mean girl that you can't help like if you're the watcher or if you're the reader. But the characters in universe totally hate them. So she's kind of like a Regina George, but actually nice because she's popular and she gets, you know, tributes to like her. And she's really funny. Her comebacks are like A's, and I think she's going to be a fan favorite as well. So I can't wait to see more of her. And it's kind of actually sad because we also know what happens to Mayceli towards the end. And I think if she survived along with Hamish, she would have made a fantastic mentor. And I think she Snow took a lot from the characters that we love, and Snow really took a lot from the characters that we love, not just from Katniss and Peeta, but from the other Victors as well that we have met and now getting to know their stories like Hamish. So yeah, so I'll check back tomorrow and watch part 2 and part 3. This is going to be a very long video. Part 2 and part 3 I might do a quicker review instead of a chapter by chapter. I might just review part 2 and then part 3 and then the entire book, because by this time I think this video is already over an hour long, but that is fine. And we love the Hunger Games, so I could yap about it for hours and have done so during my Tumblr days. And hopefully you're enjoying this video so far, and I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments if you're also reading Sunrise and Reaping along with me. Okay, so it's the next day. I started reading part 2 of Sunrise and Reaping. I just finished chapter 10 to 12. So in chapter 10, we find out Snow set up a fake Luella. At first I thought it was a clone, but it's a doppelganger. It's a girl from District 12 that they, I guess, punished, starved, and programmed to pretend to be Luella. And she has an audio implant. So basically the Capitol, Snow, the game makers, whoever could either talk to her through the implant or listen into the conversations that's happening around her. So like everyone is kind of like on alert, like be careful what you say to Lulu or Luella. Lulu is what we call her to distinguish her from the real Luella. And just make sure you don't say anything that, you know, could compromise their alliance or their strategy in the arena. Or with Hamish in particular, he's been tapped by Beatty to basically blow up the arena, and they have like an entire plan to do that, along with his son Ampert. So Lulu is essentially a Jabberjay. She was sent there to spy on them, but just like during the dark days, a Jabberjay could be fed lies to throw the Capitol off. So I think that's what also they're trying to do with Lulu. So chapter 11 kind of discusses more on how Hamish is supposed to break the arena with Ampert. It was also mentioned that him and Katniss's dad Burdock used to steal from the houses from Victor's village, but nobody was living there. So it's kind of like, Katniss, your father has been to your future house. He likely stole from it. So that is kind of like a funny tidbit and kind of like, you know, a good connection. And the plan essentially is to drown the arena. Beatty was like telling Hamish on how to do it through the mud portal and all that. I'm not going to go into details, but it just kind of reminds me of how his games were shown in Catching Fire, or at least the tape that Katniss and Peeta watched in Catching Fire. So I feel like a lot of the scenes were cut. I think Hamish, my prediction, Hamish was successful in drowning the arena, because when I was reading Catching Fire, I can't really connect why the punishment for Hamish was so severe when he used the arena as a weapon, which technically, yeah, it's bad, but it's not even that obvious unless like you know what he's actually doing. So I don't know why the Capitol would punish him, or Snow would punish him so severely by killing, you know, his girlfriend and his brother. So I think a lot of it wasn't shown. The axe kind of boomeranged and killed the District 1 tribute, or the other career tribute that was standing and Hamish has won. I think there's a lot more that happened in the arena that was cut and this just wasn't shown, and I think Hamish was successful in breaking the arena. Another thing that I find curious is basically the strategy for the third quartercell is basically null for the second quartercell, because BD kind of explained, oh, there's no use or there's no point in like cutting off the electricity or cutting off the signal from the arena for the quartercell, because they have like backup generators and all of that. So I guess unless they did something for the third quartercell, I can't remember specifically, that BD kind of like solved that issue, that you know there's not going to be a backup generator. Or I think if I remember from Catching Fire, they accounted for it. They know there's going to be like a time delay, but the time delay is like enough for them to make it escape. But also that's also the reason that they had to leave Joanna and Peta behind, because they couldn't grab them in time before like everything comes back up. But also what kind of like strikes me is, I know there's a 25 gap between the second and the third quartercell, but how the victors essentially informs Hamish or gets his consent or get his permission, or just being transparent of like, if you really want to break into the arena, here's what we need you to do, yada. Basically, they kept Hamish informed. But when it comes to the third quartercell, they kept Katniss and Peta in the dark. It wasn't just Katniss. And the larger reasoning was that because there was too much eyes on Katniss and Peta, particularly Katniss, and Katniss is not really good at kind of like pretending or hiding the truth from her face or from her actions, that would kind of like blow their cover immediately. Okay, so that part that I did get, but like on the like knee-jerk reaction is like, but my first reaction to it was kind of like why Hamish and BD and the rest didn't give Katniss and Peta the same transparency and choice and consent that was afforded and was given to Hamish the first time around. And maybe because, well, when they did that, Hamish failed. It's interesting to see how that unfolds and kind of like looking more into Hamish thinking, because everything he's planning up to this point, like the alliances, we know that he won't really have allies in the arena. It will break down, at least based on what we see on Catching Fire. And we know that his attempt to kind of like end the Hunger Games would fail, and he suffered consequences from that. So I guess those are the instances that make him change his mind on how he approached being a mentor and being part of the rebellion for Katniss and Peta's games. But it's just interesting that he chose to do differently for Katniss and Peta as opposed to what is done with him or for him during his own games. And also a funny thing that I also noticed is that Hamish, whether he likes it or not, he's good at making alliances. So I can understand his frustration with Katniss and Peta, especially with Katniss and Catching Fire, because Peta is pretty good at making alliances. He made allies with the careers during the 74th Hunger Games that she's not making that good of an effort to make allies. And for me, again, the standout character is Miss Seeley Donner. I really, really like her. And with Lenore Dove, again, I keep comparing her to Gale. They're not the same characters, but they have the same character, I guess, beats. For me, reading about Lenore Dove is the same way that I feel when I was reading about Gale in the first Hunger Games. Like, we hear about him a lot, and I feel like I'm supposed to like Lenore Dove, but for some reason I'm not liking her as much as I should, or I guess how Hamish wants me to like Lenore Dove. And Lenore Dove hates Miss Seeley Donner. Miss Seeley Donner apparently knows a secret of Lenore Dove, so it also kind of reminds me the relationship between the daughter of the mayor and Lucy Greybeard in the Battles of Songbirds and Snake. They're always at odds with each other. The conflict or the friction between Lenore Dove and Miss Seeley is a lot more different than that, but I really like Miss Seeley. I love her spunk. She's a mean girl, but she's also nice. She's very smart. She's very observant, and I'm picturing her as the fan cast of the Hunger Games YouTube movie, so that's who I'm picturing in my head as Miss Seeley Donner. But I'm really excited to see the casting for Miss Seeley Donner, because I think she's going to be an important cast. And at the end of chapter 12, we had a surprise character that I didn't think we're going to meet in this book. It's Effie Trinket. It was such a good reveal. She's basically a sister of the student stylist. And the thing is that I've always been under the impression that Hamish is older than Effie. But for Effie to be a university student, at the very least, I think she's a university student or a recent graduate of the university, she has to be in her early 20s at least. Like, she's probably like 21, 22, at the youngest 20. and then Hamish is 16 years old. So I always thought Effie was younger than Hamish, but apparently Effie is older than Hamish, at least by a couple of years. So there's that. So how Effie enters into the conversation or into the scene, basically, Drusilla has been kind of like been acting both the escort, the stylist, and part-time mentor, even though they had Mags and Wirus as mentors. Like I said earlier, there is no way Hamish would like Effie in canon because of his experience with Drusilla. But Drusilla at this point, yes, she's still like mean. She still sees them as animals. She's like way meaner. She's basically Aunt Lydia from The Handmaid's Tale. But she also kind of like instills in them like what you need to do or what you need to say in order to have sponsors during your interviews. And I think she was really good at that, making sure to tap into the strengths of the tributes of District 12. May Sealy still took her advice on how to be memorable. This is why I love May Sealy. May Sealy was like critiquing like, money can't buy taste, all of you are ugly, like District 12 minors, like the boys from District 12 are like much cuter than Capital boys or whatever like that, much prettier girls. I love her comebacks. I love everything that comes out of her mouth. The stylist basically abandons them, like dies or get poisoned by licking toes. Like he is in no way cynic at all. He's probably more like Hamish in like, you know, later years, like just getting drunk and all of that. That's where Effie steps in. So basically the stylist students or the stylist interns ask for her help, and then the reason that I know it's Effie, aside from turning to the first page of chapter 13, is like chapter 12 ends with, it's gonna be a big day, which is Effie's signature line. So yeah, so I'm reading 13, 14, and 15 now, and I'll be right back with my reactions. Okay, so I finished chapters 13 to 15, which is like the second act of part 2, and I'm loving Hafey in this chapter. So where we left off in chapter 12, it's revealed Effie is the sister of one of the stylist interns, Proserpina, and basically she takes over the role of Magno as the stylist for District 12. And I love Effie in this. I love her reveal, and I love her role that she plays in this book, and she's pretty much present in chapters 13 to 15. She's not just like casually mentioned or have one-off scenes. I love the Hafey interactions, although they're like not really romantic or anything, but they are friendly. And like my earlier concerns that because of Hamish's impression of Drusilla, there is no way Effie and Hamish would ever get together in canon in the books. People have always treated Hafey, especially those who don't like Hafey, as kind of like the movie version is just separate from the book canon, and Hafey is never gonna happen in book canon. And I'm okay with that personally. I'm a big fan of movie Hafey, but I'm okay with them not ending up in the books. But because of the interactions that they have in this book, even though they are not romantic at all, it kind of like reaffirms the changes that was made into movie with Effie's character. It's not really much of a change, but really more of a deeper dive on Effie's character, that she is really capable of that change, of that sympathy from that empathy. And as Hamish like quickly assesses her, she's not mean, she's just clueless. She just bought into the propaganda. Effie is different from other stylists or future escorts. Like she wants to keep up with them. She's a very accomplished young woman. Like before even meeting her, like her qualifications and her accomplishments at a young age at university was rattled off. She reminds me so much of Elle Woods, with like she's the president of this. She started this like social gathering of the year that's become like the talk of the town, at least within the university. A lot of Effie's movie development is reaffirmed with her backstory in the book, and I'm really glad Suzanne Collins did that. Like the Effie haters and the Hafey haters are not gonna like it. I was kicking my feet, giggling with every Hafey interaction, and it's just kind of like, for me, it's foreshadowing. And it's really interesting to see Hamish's relationship develop with May Sealy. Again, there's nothing really romantic with what's going on between Hamish and May Sealy, but the bond is being established. Like the relationship is being formed, and kind of like same with Effie and Hamish. And then of course Hamish is still very much obsessed with Lenore Dove, and Plutarch was even able to get them a phone call before he heads off the arena, and it's a way of Plutarch's getting Hamish's trust. And within Leonardo, she's kind of like blaming herself why Hamish got sent to the arena, that she feels that she essentially killed Hamish, and she's kind of like, oh, she doesn't want to live without him. And then Hamish was like, no, you got to live on. And Lenore said something to the effect that, oh, I'm like the geese, I mean, for life, it's just gonna be you forever. But even then, and this is how I know Hayfie could happen in the future, even though Lenore is probably Hamish's great love of his life, or his one true love, it's because, like he says, no, after he thought, even though he can't say it to her, he thought that his immediate thought was like, no, you should love whoever you want after I'm gone. Like, nobody deserves to be alone. He keeps his love for Lenore Dove, he would be able to move on eventually. Of course, not for a very long time, as we've seen in the books. Like he really mourns her death and what happened to her. Come after the events of Mockingjay, when, you know, they successfully ended the games, taking down Snow, and, you know, he sees Katniss and Peeta having kids and all of that. I think Hamish will find himself in a place, even before, of course, Katniss and Peeta having kids, is that, you know, he can find a life for himself with the geese, and maybe even with Effie. And also, the first quarter quell is described a lot in this book, which reminds me of how the second quarter quell was described in Catching Fire, which makes me think Suzanne is dropping hints that if she ever writes a third prequel book, it's going to be in the first quarter quell, which kind of makes sense because, you know, she already written about a second and third quarter quell. Why not the first quarter quell too? But I feel like that's kind of like a step back. If she was going to do that, she should have probably written that first before coming up with a second quarter quell book. But, you know, maybe she's going in reverse when it comes to telling the stories of quarter quell. But in the first quarter quell, we do find that Lucky Flickerman is still the host, Dr. Gold is still the head game maker, and she's the one who coined "May the odds bear your favor" for that first quarter quell, and kind of like caught on and became kind of like the catchphrase of the Hunger Games. And we also know after the 10th Hunger Games, pretty much how we know the games is now in Hamish's quarter quell and in Katniss's games. That's when kind of like all the changes happened, them choosing like a different arena each year, having sponsors, mentors, interviews, all of that, like the how we know, like training, so everything how we know the games is by the time Hamish participated in it, and then later on Katniss and Peeta, that all kind of like started right after the 10th Hunger Games. And again, just to go back to Effie, I'm also loving her interactions with Mace Seeley. They're kind of like the beauty gurus of Padam. Like, Mace Seeley is the fashion girly, and I mean Effie is too, but like she's also more of the makeup girly. And had Mace Seeley lived, I think they would have a good relationship. And also, one tidbit about Effie's history is her great aunt is kind of like hinted that she was likely a Capitol rebel, something that is kind of like a little better than a district sympathizer. But I think in one form or another, her great aunt was a Capitol rebel, that to the point that it caused disgrace to the Trinket name, but not so much that it kind of like punished the entire line, so it was still redeemable. And I think Vitus, which is the partner of Proserpina, Effie's sister, as the stylist intern for 12, I think he is related to Sejanus, because he said like one of his ancestors was a district sympathizer. So I'm like, Vitus is Sejanus, and they haven't really given us the last name of Vitus yet. So yeah, I think he is likely related to Sejanus. And then also, like, Plutarch just continues to mentor Hamish what to do at the games, which also reminds me of how Hamish mentors Katniss in the game. So I feel like that's how Hamish learned it from, is from Plutarch. And also they keep coming up with nicknames for like careers for themselves, like, you know, for the non-career district reviews, they're the newcomers, and then for the careers, they're trying to give them a new nickname to kind of like insult them. And the best they could come with was like near beer careers. I'm like, the nicknames are not giving. I'm sorry, Suzanne, that if there's a weak point in this storytelling is those nicknames, like, which is kind of like disappointing, because the nicknames in like the original trilogy was like giving, like brainless and all of that. I really liked it. I bought it. With this one, they're kind of cringe a little bit, but it's okay. It doesn't really affect me either way. And chapter 15 is just like them heading off to the arena. We get to see what the arena looks like for the first time. Hamish, of course, decides to go off on his own And even though he let like his allies know about that, it's better for them because the game leaders are targeting him. And also he has this secret mission from Beatty to blow up the arena. Part 2 only has about less than 40 pages left before it ends. So next 3 chapters is just 30 to 40 pages, which I know is not enough to cover the entire game. So the story arc and the pacing of this book tracks along with the first Hunger Games book, which I'm not mad about. I like the information that we're getting so far. It's entertaining. Since it's only 400 pages, unlike the Battle of the Song vs. Snakes is like 600 pages, I don't think we're gonna get a lot more information of what happens right after his games. We might get a good chunk of it like we did with the first Hunger Games book. We see a little bit of what happened, like the direct impact or the immediate impact of what Katniss and Peeta did at the arena after they won, but not a lot of details, and I'm kind of disappointed about that, only because I really wanted to know more how it affected Haymitch's friends, especially Katniss's parents and Peeta's dad, Arthur Millard. I mean, I'm glad they were mentioned. I'm glad that we know their name in part 1, but I kind of wanted a bit more. I kind of want to learn more about them. And again, I keep saying this, one of the big things or the main things that I want to read from Haymitch book is to learn really more about District 12 characters that were mentioned in passing in the trilogy and kind of like the earlier generation, which is Haymitch's generation, and find out more about them, how the relationships evolved and all that, because I still have a lot of questions. I'm glad with the information Suzanne shared. I feel like those were really fan services. She could have written the story without mentioning Katniss's mom, Katniss's dad, and Peeta's dad in the books, but I'm glad she did, and I'm glad she included Effie. So yeah, I'm gonna read the rest of part 2 and come back to you. So I'm done with part 2, chapter 17 to 19. A lot has happened at the same time. Not basically, it's just a sequence of events of what happened when Haymitch got into the arena, what the arena looks like, and we kind of already know that from Catching Fire. It's like too pretty, everything is poisonous, and he went off on his own at first, but then Lulu found him. Lulu died when they get attacked by Mutts, but that allowed him to find the hatch where the Mutts return home to so he could execute Beatty's plan. And after that, Ampert found him and they carried out his plan. It did work, but it ended up to Ampert unfortunately dying. He got attacked by another set of Mutts, squirrels this time. And it's pretty gruesome with the way he died. They basically picking off clean to his bones. But Haymitch thought he had succeeded with his plan, with Beatty's plan in breaking the arena. But of course, they had failed. It worked for a second, but the arena was damaged, but it wasn't broken. And now we're on to part 3. Okay, so I started reading chapter 19, which is the beginning of part 3. I misspoke. The last part of part 2 is from 16 to 18. And here's the trouble that I'm running with this book now. At this point, at chapter 19, and I know we probably got 8 more chapters in this book, and it seems like the games is kind of wrapping up, so it's probably gonna wrap up by chapter 21 or 22, I hope, because he hasn't teamed up with Mayseela yet, but I think he's on his way to. The problem that I'm having with this book is kind of like my hesitations why I didn't want a book in Haymitch's games, because we already had the details, we know what happens. So in this book, while we get a lot more details of what happened behind the scenes, it is still pretty much the same structure as what we know from Haymitch's games. So at this point, I'm not saying I find it boring, but once he entered the arena, it kind of like slowed down for me, even though a lot of things are happening, a lot of like horrible things are happening, a lot of interesting things are happening. It is not very compelling to me. And I think what would have made this a little bit more compelling is if we actually get to see what the capital is seeing, what is the districts is seeing, compared to how Haymitch is experiencing it in the arena. So if we get it back and forth, and I don't think we're gonna get it in this book, we might be able to get it in the movie version. That kind of like split screen or like back and forth point of view works better in a movie adaptation. So hopefully that would happen in the movie, but right now it kind of falls flat. Right now it kind of falls flat. Again, I might be speaking too soon. This is chapter 19 after all. There's still a lot to go on the book. So that's kind of like what I'm missing in this book, especially if the theme is propaganda. Like what we see on TV is very different from what is actually happening in real life. And like propaganda is what how the Capitol want to see what's actually happening versus what is actually happening. We're not really getting that with the limited point of view of Haymitch. So there's that. And for me, for me up to this point at chapter 19, my favorite parts are the cameos, like the cameos of characters that we know of or like wanted to know about, like Katniss's parents, Peeta's dad, even though it's just like in one scene during the reaping. Effie showing up was like a really nice surprise. Plutarch showing up too, Wirus, Max, BT. So it's kind of like the Caesar Flickerman. So the cameos of those characters that we know or know of is what's really making this book exciting for me. As far as new characters, no one really stand out except for Maisily Donner. And we also kind of knew Maisily Donner already, even though she was only mentioned briefly too in the trilogies. I could imagine it being adapted on screen and how it better plays out, because a lot of it is also visual and much better enjoyed if you could actually see it than just read about it. So I think that impression is going to hold up until the end of the book, even if it's still surprising me. I mean, it did surprise me with Effie. So I think the book still has surprises for me in part 3. It usually does. I mean, her biggest bombshells usually happen in the 3rd act, but so far that's how I feel about this book. Like, I'm glad we have it, but I also kind of like, it reaffirms my hesitation or my lack of desire for having a Haymitch book, because I don't think we're really getting much from it. And for me, at least, the themes that she says she's gonna explore in this book, they are present, but they are not as hammered as they were, let's say, maybe the themes of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes or the themes in Mockingjay. Like, the themes in Mockingjay are very heavy-hitting, and I don't think, again, I might be speaking too soon. I'm not even through the first chapter of part 3, which is chapter 19, but I just want to like give it out there, kind of like my initial review of this book up to this point. I go continue read part 3. Might still do the reviews every 3 chapters, so we'll see how it goes. But my notes are getting like less and less as each chapter goes. So a lot of like the excitement and fun details for me were like front loaded, which is very different from The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. For me, like the part 1 and 2 was kind of boring, and then part 3 is where it really kicked off for me. So with this one, part 1 is my favorite. It kind of starts the lull in part 2 after the Effie chapters when we got into the arena. Again, the reason for this is what happens in the arena is what we're most familiar with. While lacking in details, it follows pretty much the same beats of what we already know from Haymitch's games from Catching Fire, even if we are getting more details and more insight. And the thing is, and one big thing that is missing is how the Capitol and how the districts are actually seeing these events unfold. Because right now, everything is we're seeing from Haymitch's point of view, but we don't really know if what Haymitch is seeing is what is also the Capitol is seeing. We don't know how the Capitol is spinning everything. So we're just like going off Haymitch assumptions or like challenges to the game makers. Let's see how you spin this. Let's see how you spin this event that he did. But we don't know because we're not seeing it, because everything is limited in Haymitch's point of view. But yeah. I finally finished reading Sunrise Reaping. I finished part 3. I didn't come back to discuss it chapter by chapter. I just finished all the way through. In part 3, we pretty much know what exactly is going to happen, because it's pretty much what a chunk of Catching Fire is. Well, at least the part of Catching Fire that discusses Haymitch's games, it just went into more detail. So while there are things that are, I guess, supposed to be more exciting or more edge of your seat, it didn't really feel that way because we kind of know what's happening. It doesn't give the feel of like, even though I know what's happening, I wish it didn't happen. It's more like, because I know I'm happening, it kind of like tempered down the, I won't say excitement, because this is the games. It kind of tempered down the tension that I would have felt while reading this book, just because I know how it goes, because it just goes beat for beat for beat, even though there are a lot more details. And my prediction, like early on, is kind of right, that there's part of the ending of the games that it cut off. It was Haymitch trying to blow up the arena again the second time around, after he had already won, and of course that was completely cut off from his games, and of course during the broadcast. And as I mentioned earlier, I kind of wish there was like a back and forth of what the capital sees or what the districts is shown versus what Hamish is already shown. But we did, like, later on after he already won the games, just kind of like a recap of the games. As we know, this definitely follows the pacing of the first Hunger Games books to the T. I've said that multiple times. So when he was already like declared a winner and was being paraded around the Capitol, and there was like a recap of his games, the recap of the games is basically what Katniss and Peeta saw on the tapes. So again, so me wanting to have that back and forth with the Capitol, maybe I guess also moot, because we already know what was shown in the Capitol, what was shown to the Capitol, what was shown to the district. And what was interesting, I guess what I really wanted to find out, is what happens after he returns, how his family died, how Lenore Dove died. And it was pretty gruesome. It was really, really sad. I think part 1 was much more stronger, and it kind of like tempered off for me, just because, again, for me, once I know how a story goes, even though we have plenty of details from it, it doesn't really improve the story for me. So like when I get spoilers for a movie or a book, it really just tempers down my enjoyment of it, but I still really liked it. And the best part of part 3 is, of course, the epilogue. I kind of predicted that we're gonna get an epilogue the same way we got an epilogue in Mockingjay, but it's going to be from Hamish's point of view. And it was kind of like that, just a little bit earlier, on how like Hamish got the keys. And we got to see Katniss and Peeta. So I'm really excited about that, especially for the movie version. So this is an opportunity for like the original actors to come back and do the epilogue, especially they are at the right age at this point to play the characters exactly from the epilogue. So that they're at the perfect age for it. So like Woody, Jennifer Lawrence, and Josh Hutcherson coming back for the epilogue, I'm pretty sure they would say yes. I'm pretty sure they would say yes. So I'm really excited about that. And not to downplay Lenore Dove and Hamish's relationship, it is obviously, like I said earlier, like Lenore Dove is his one true love. It's the great love of his life. There's no arguing about that. But I'm really glad with how much Hafey was fed in this book. The role Effie Trinket played in Hamish's, like, very early on. And of course, you know, like their relationship like has up and downs after this, up until the games, up until Katniss and Peeta's games. But it was nice to see Effie, which was a good chunk of this, the backstory that we got, and how her initial relationship with Hamish developed to the point, like, at one point after his games, Effie was the first person he saw, and Effie was the only one there for him right after his games. I really like that. I was really pleasantly surprised about that. My lingering question is, again, I kind of like wish we've seen more of Candace's parents. I mean, we've seen them at the beginning and at the end. But my lingering question is with Peeta's dad. Was he really just that delulu when it comes to Candace's mom, when it comes to Astrid? Because how did he get the idea that he was going to marry Candace's mom? Was that just like an unrequited love on his part? Because like all this time, I was under the impression, the entire fandom was in the impression that they dated first, and then the games affected the relationship. Miss Seeley's death really affected Astrid, that they broke up, and that was kind of brought Burdock and Astrid together. But it seems like the relationship has been developing even before Hamish's games, and Otho was nowhere near the picture. So it's such a pivotal piece of information, because that is such an important turning point for Peeta. That is the basis of Peeta's entire start to fall in love with Katniss at age 5. Like knowing his father pointing out Katniss during kindergarten and saying, I was supposed to marry her mom. That was also Peeta's entire basis of him falling in love with Katniss. And I kind of like, I'm kind of like disappointed that wasn't really addressed in the book. I guess there wasn't really any time, but at least we get to meet him though. At least we get to meet Peeta's dad, even just for a split second. But I kind of like wish he played a little bit of a bigger role in this one, and we got to see how the relationship between Katniss' parents and Peeta's dad kind of like develop. And I think there's one thing that we could definitely get from the movie, because we could have characters like that be explored a little bit more. And even with President Snow, we didn't get really to see much of President Snow in here. We see much of him the same way we saw him as much of him in, I guess, in the first book or even in Catching Fire, which is not a lot. Like, we see glimpse of him hidden there, but not a lot. But again, depending on who they cast, if they get like Kiefer Sutherland or something like, you know, a really A-list actor, they're probably going to give him a bigger role like they did give Donald Sutherland when he played President Snow. And I'm just really excited because, like, again, my favorite part of this book are the cameos from the characters that we already know and love, from like the past Vectors to Affy, and again, Candace's parents and Peeta's dad. I mean, keep saying that over and over. And Macy Lee is definitely my favorite character in this book. I really enjoyed her character a lot and I really loved it. And the epilogue, like, I think without the epilogue I would have rated this book a little bit lower, but because we got the epilogue, this just kind of like jumped up. So I think this is a good follow-up to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I think they're pretty equal, and if I say so, this probably edges a little bit because this is a much funner read than the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, because as much as President Snow's character is one of my favorite characters of the Hunger Games, it was really hard reading from his point of view. But I did love the movie, and I can't wait for the movie version of this because it's gonna kick ass as a movie version, like especially with the changes that I said that could happen in the movie. But yeah, so those are my initial quick thoughts on Sunrise and the Reaping, Hamish's book. I hope you enjoyed the read along with me. I might have more thoughts on this as I edit this video. I might have, like, you know, a conclusion towards the end after I kind of like summarize all my thoughts and, you know, kind of like the stories sink in. But I hope you enjoyed my read along and reaction to Sunrise and the Reaping, and let me know in the comments how much you enjoyed this book, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what kind you thought was missing, or what things that surprised you that you liked that were added in the book that you didn't expect to be added. But yeah, so thanks for watching. Bye.